your speech, and just let us know when you're ready.
Okay, thank you. And I've enjoyed listening to because it's always important to me to hear what's going on in the industry. So thank y'all for letting me hop on for a few minutes. So thank y'all for having me this afternoon. It's nice to be inside on a rainy afternoon listening and finding out some good information. So I thought I'd highlight, since not everybody always works at the Railroad Commission and knows what we do. I think Dr. Hill does. He works with us occasionally, but make sure that I explain what we do today. So first and foremost, we don't do railroads. I think most of this audience would probably understand that, and I appreciate it. Look, today we are the oil and gas regulator in this state. So we are regulating the number of wells and well permitting. Today, we roughly 250,000 active and inactive wells in this state. We have about 480,000 miles of interstate, intrastate, and gathering lines in the state. I've been told that's enough to take you to the moon and back, so that's a lot of pipe in this state. We also have gas utilities, which we regulate, gas utility lines in this state. So what goes to your home if you've got gas utilities or LDCs, that's roughly another 500,000 miles of pipe in the state. So that's a lot of pipe in the state. We're the biggest pipe state by a sixth. It's important to have good inspectors, which I'll get back to in a minute. We also do surface mining in the state. People forget about that. Surface mining, coal mining is important in our state. If you go to East Texas or along our border with Mexico, you'll see surface mines. So we don't have coal mines like West Virginia. It is strip mining. And again, we have inspectors for that as well. We also, people forget, we have a few other what I call our alternative type energy sources in this state that we have a piece of. So if you are drilling a new uranium mine in this state, yes, we have uranium mines in the state. South Texas, down in that Eagleford area, we do the initial exploration permits. If you've got long-term permits, those go through Department of Health, one of those legislative quirks that nobody understands, but that's sort of how it works. We also have geothermal rules in the state, and people are beginning to talk about that more. We haven't seen a permit in 25, 30 years, but people are beginning to talk about that more, and that we see if that part of the energy industry begins to develop again in Texas, as well as, and I was interested in the conversation about carbon and carbon capture. Texas, we're trying to make sure we are available for all new technologies. And so in 2003, we were the first state to put carbon CO2 rules in place for EOR projects. And so we are seeing that being used in a couple of oil fields across the state. And again, first state to have those kind of rules. And we think those are important long-term, although I don't know that I disagree with Dr. Hill that doing some kind of carbon capture on scale is a huger project and a larger project than most people in most countries appreciate. And I worked with a National Petroleum Council in the past year and a half on a carbon capture study, so it's worth y'all looking at. But I think to get it to scale is very, very expensive and a real challenge, but we're ready to do it if this state wants to go that direction. So those are kind of the high level of what we do as far as regulations as an agency. There are three of us who are all elected statewide, and I'm in my second term actually. And so I'm in year 9, I think. And so I've been chairman. This is my third time. Somehow I pick being chairman, or I'm asked to be chairman during session. Somehow I got to figure out how not to do that again. It's always a nice challenge. So I thought I'd talk for a minute, kind of what we do about the environmental, and I appreciate y'all talking about the HSE piece. We really focus on the environmental piece specifically at our agency. Part of our goal is to prevent waste and protect the environment. That's what is in our mission statement. That's what we were created to do when oil and gas was really discovered and developed in this state. That's what we got 102, 103 years ago. And that's what our priorities have been. So if you look at all of the rules that we have in place as an agency, they really are environmental protection rules for the most part, every way you look at them. So I thought I'd go back to the easy stuff, so to speak, first. And surface mining is important. Again, I said in the state, we have a surface mining division. We have inspectors, by the way, across our agency in 10 field offices. And part of what some of our inspectors have to do with surface mining. We permit those mines, but we also make sure as those mines are played out and are used, that we make sure there's remediation to those. And so we are based on that remediation policies based on federal standards and federal guidelines. And in fact, every year we honor a mining company or a mine that has really exceeded the standards. And a lot of those mines now are looking at not just exceeding the standards and putting it back to nice grassland, which most of this is, and farmland, but also looking at using native plants, using other things. And so that remediation for those is really important. Parks and Wildlife gets involved. And so that's a vibrant part of our agency. Again, I talked about pipelines and pipeline safety. We don't get into routing. Hopefully we don't get that this session again as they're having those conversations, but safety and safety inspections are important to the state. We have roughly 70 plus inspectors that are pipeline safety inspectors, and we inspect anything that is an oil product. So it's water, no, but everything else, oil, natural gas products, all of those pipes are inspected by us. Again, we work with the PHMSA guidelines, federal guidelines, and we are in process of putting more best practices in place. You'll see some additional rules come out from us to make sure we are at least at PHMSA guidelines, if not above their guidelines for safety. We take that really important. And if you look at Texas, we've got a lot of pipe and we have very few real accidents, and that's important to us. Again, and the other piece is, it really has to do with the oil and gas and the oil and gas field. So we have a lot of rules, and I always say it's from the beginning to end. And so, like, I grew up in West Texas, and which is the middle of a desert. And so water's always been a priority for me, because if you don't have water to drink, much less frack all these wells, then it doesn't matter. You've got to have water to live. So when you look at, when you're coming in day to day to get a drilling permit from us, first and foremost, you have to get a groundwater advisory unit letter from us. That tells you where, and because we have, I believe, some of the best maps for groundwater in the state. No offense to my water development board friends over across the street from us, but we have some of the best groundwater maps in the state. Before you are able to even get a drilling permit, you have to come in and get a groundwater advisory unit permit. And in doing so, it tells you where the freshwater zones are in that area that you want to drill. And we then say, so say they're at 500 feet. We then say, you have to protect through casing and cement. You have to protect through that freshwater zone. We do not want an issue. And if you do have an issue, you're going to come clean it up, by the way, but we don't want an issue for water first and foremost. So that's always been a priority for us. Will continue to be, by the way. When you look at rules, when you look at well integrity rules, by the way, and as you've looked at different rules about how we make you clean up spills, what we do, that's all environmental stuff. So we are a very environmentally aware agency when you look specifically at what we're doing. And again, we have inspectors all over the state. For the oil and gas division, we roughly have, I think we're at about 250 inspectors across the state. Last year, we did 200,000 inspections in this state. It's our highest number ever. And we then enforce. We ask people, and we do things a little bit differently than our friends over at TCQ. They enforce first and then ask later. We try to work with companies to clean up. We want that to happen. We don't want to acquire wells if we don't have to. We would like those jobs to continue and want to make sure companies are operating to our standards. And so we ask people to clean up or remediate their rule infractions first and foremost. We actually have a pretty vibrant self-reporting process at our agency too. If you self-report, and before we get out there to do an inspection, and we want to work with you so we're not just penalizing you every 5 minutes. We think that's a good way to operate most of the time, and we see a lot of compliance with that self-reporting. But we do go and do an inspections, then we go back and check too. And look, if somebody doesn't get in compliance with us after they've paid a penalty or tried to work with us, we can jerk their operating permit, and we do that roughly 16 to 17 times a year. So think about drilling a $5 million horizontal well and you don't get in compliance with our rules and we think it's pretty egregious, we are going to shut you down. That's a lot of money you just left when you can't left on the table when you can't sell that oil, so, or natural gas. So we take that very seriously, and we appreciate that companies work with us and work through that with us. So, so when you look, I want to highlight a couple of the rules of when we're talking that we've been watching and pay attention to. Look, flaring is a big issue. Everybody's talking about flaring, I think. It is the topic du jour, so to speak, and it's a real challenge for this industry. We're in a high growth state. We've had a lot of development between us, New Mexico, and North Dakota. Flaring's been an issue for those three states for the last several years. We're seeing companies really be aware of that. We've worked with companies for the last several years, and we do have a flaring rule in place, and we think it's a decent flaring rule. It's been in place, and we're still looking and making sure we've got best practices. We've looked at what other states are doing as they've watched, as they continue to develop, and that's a real challenge for, I think, everybody. We don't want to shut an oil field down. I don't think that works very well in this state, but we want to make sure companies are in compliance and really being aware that when they drill a well, they shouldn't expect that they're going to get a flaring permit for the rest of the life of that well. They need to figure out how to make sure that well gets connected to pipe. And that's really important. For the last 18 months, this agency's been very focused on flaring and how we work with industry to resolve some of that. You will, if you go back and look in September, we put in place a new flaring data sheet. We want more information, and that's going to be really important for us overall, not just as the Railroad Commission, but frankly as a state, to understand where those flare issues are and what we can do long-term to remediate that. That's a new form, and it will be online. I was just told by the beginning of May. So we will have more data even online, and that's going to, again, more important for us. But meanwhile, we've watched industry really get in front of and do some of their own planning, much better planning about methane and flaring without regulatory interference. So we'll see how far that takes us. If you look at our numbers generally, though, in the state, about 2% of the gas we produce is flared, and that's all. That's a pretty good number for a large state. So we are appreciative of industry looking and being smart about it. But again, it's one of the focuses as an agency. The other piece that we've looked at for the last several years that has to do, again, with safety and environmental issues, has to do with seismicity. Seismicity has been an issue in the state really for the last 7 years. Seven coming on to 8 years. And look, we didn't have anybody who knew that issue when I got to this agency. We've put rules in place. We think we've got pretty good rules, and in fact, we probably had some of the most stringent rules in the state, in the country, as far as gathering data and being able to go in when you have a saltwater disposal well specifically and think there's potential issues. We continue to work through guidelines on that rule. We started with that rule that we needed to address some issues up in the Azle Barnett Shale area. We're now looking and have just put some guidelines in place for the Pecos area, and now we're looking at Midland Andrews area. So it is, and this is a big state. One size doesn't fit all. Geology is not the same every place. Again, we get a lot of feedback from industry, and we try to make sense for people as they're trying to come in and get permits. We do not want to shut a field down. So we're getting a lot of feedback, not just from our seismologists and our engineers, but we're asking industry a lot of questions. That's important for us long term. So I think, to put it in perspective, when you're looking at what we do as an agency, we produce a third of the country's oil and a fourth of the country's natural gas comes out of Texas. We're the number one producer, really, when you look at across the state, and Texas really leads. And it's the dollars that come in and the jobs that it creates is really important. That's why I say I think I regulate the most important state agency in the country, probably, when you look at the economic impact. That last year, this industry brought in $13.9 billion into this state, with all tax dollars permit fees, other dollars that come in from this industry. And look, it's got over 400,000 jobs are in this state long term, I hope. And I think even though we've lost about 100,000 jobs during COVID, we're beginning to see some recovery. You're starting to see some of those service companies are starting to hire some people, and usually they go first and they go last. So when you see service companies beginning to hire, you feel like you've got some recovery in the state. But what I'm excited about long term for this industry, and we're seeing it in our permit numbers, we're seeing it just across the state. The technology, even in the last 18 months, has changed. It's gotten smarter in the oil field. We're issuing fewer drilling permits and still producing about 3.98 million barrels of oil a day. That's only off 7% from where we were a year ago. So I think there's a lot of opportunity long term. And what our goal is at the commission is to make sure we are working not just with industry, but other groups across the country, making sure we have best practices in place and making sure that we allow for innovation, because I think you've seen the innovation really that's being used in the oil fields. A lot of it has come out of Texas in the last 20, 30, 40 years, and we want that to continue, whether it's safety issues, whether it's use of water. We want that opportunity, and we want to make sure that continues in this state. So the last piece I want to talk about for just a minute, for those of you who ever look at our website and want to know where things are, we do have a pretty good website and we've worked on it. We have a GIS mapping system that tells you where every well is and pipes, and we continue to develop that. More transparency has been a priority, and more information has been a priority for this agency since I've been there. And we're in the middle of a huge IT upgrade, so stay tuned. You'll see by September what I call phase one. We've got a fancy name for it, about what we're going to put more information online. And again, that transparency, so people understand what's going on in this industry. They can ask questions, they can look up information about what's going on the well down the street from them is going to continues to be a priority at this agency. We think that really goes more to protecting the environment, and also people understanding how generally we operate in this state very safe, and that is a priority for all these companies. So I appreciate y'all having me today, and I appreciate the feedback. If anybody's got any questions, I think I may have left some time for some, but I'll be glad to answer anything.
I'll let the
Go ahead.
panelists go first. Dr. Hasan, you were saying?
Oh, I was saying that if you have received any questions from audience.
From the audience, no, but I feel like Dr. Hill has something to say.
Go ahead.
I just want to say thank you, Commissioner. That was a really nice overview of what the Railroad Commission does, how it handles, supervises and aids this industry, which, as you point out, is such a huge economic benefit to the state. So thank you, Dr.
Thanks, Dr. Hill. And look, I appreciate y'all having me today, and it's important for us to continue getting good feedback from those of you in the industry. So if you've got something you see, if you see new technology, if you see something we're not addressing well, please contact my office, because we're only as good as and only know the issues when you tell us. And so I appreciate the time, and thank you all very much for having me today.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, have a good day.
You too.
Well, this brings our meeting to a conclusion, and we would like to conclude it right now unless anyone has comments or, oh, I'm sorry, there is an audience poll that we cannot be part of. Makes sense. So, William, are you getting those and taking care of them?
Might want to unmute, William.
Apparently, he seems to be muted himself.
Whoops. All right. I was mentioning a big thank you for all the participants and their organizations. If anybody in the audience have questions, you can email me at Villalobos